right, I believe this is kind of where we left off on Tuesday, and I kind of wanted to go through these in one lecture. We might be a little bit short today, but that's okay. But I want to finish this up on dealing with group cohesion and being together, because obviously, if you have too much cohesion, as we'll see, it can interrupt the flow and the healing journey of each individual participant. When you have too little cohesion, then you're not really doing a good group process. It's something that is not advantageous. So let's just talk about this. So this is when we use the word cohesiveness, we're basically saying it's a measure of loyalty that group members have to the group and the group process. Okay, and you can look at it on three different levels. One is level of participation. As we know, as cohesion rises, so will participation, because if you feel like you belong there and you feel like you're a member of that group, you're more likely to talk and express yourself. But too much can also end up wasting time, because as that level of participation, as that level of cohesion gets tighter and tighter, the group tends to then become a kind of a self-interested concept, where they just want to talk about their experiences as groups and not move the group along through a treatment process. Okay. Level of conformity: as conformity rises, so does cohesion. But again, as we will see, as too much conformity, performance can suffer. And then level of goals, group goals accomplished: as cohesiveness rises, emphasis on group accomplishment will rise as well. But again, if it's too high, it can cause groups to focus on itself than being grounded in the healing process. Okay, so this is an important concept, but we also have to kind of, as facilitators, kind of balance it and make sure that individuals do feel like they belong in a group, but that doesn't necessarily mean they lose their individuality towards their own healing and their own treatment. All right. So here are some of the determinants of cohesiveness, and it can be changed by changing any of these different variables. Okay, one is group size. If you have a small group, group cohesiveness can get higher. As you increase the number of group members, then you start to lower the cohesiveness. And this is why we kind of give that range, right? We recommend not under 5 participants for a good healthy treatment. You're going to get way too high of a cohesiveness level. 6 to 9 is, again, that sweet spot where you'll get everybody engaged, but they won't lose themselves in the group process. And then when you get above about 9, 10, or 11, that's when you then start to see cohesiveness go down, which isn't good as well. So managing diversity: diverse groups often come up with better solutions than what's called homogeneity, which is most of the participants are similar backgrounds. Okay, now I do want to say this: when we talk about diversity in group settings, we're not necessarily talking about ethnicity or gender or race. We're talking about experience. Okay. And I want you to kind of keep that in mind when we're thinking about diversity, is encouraging the expression of individuals' experiences versus conforming kind of to the group's experience and saying, yeah, I had a similar experience like that, when in reality, they probably had a slightly or almost completely different experience than what the group is experiencing. So when we say managing diversity, I know in most cases, you probably instantly come up with, make sure you have a good mix of racial, age, and while that is good and healthy in given situations, we're actually looking at diversity and experience, not necessarily within those other categories. Okay. Group identity, and again, we'll talk a lot about this next week, is when cohesiveness is low, encourage to adopt a unique identity to engage in healthy competition with others. Okay. And what we mean when we say develop a group identity, sometimes I've seen even in a lot of adult groups where a facilitator sees that there's just not this connection that usually evolves because everyone comes to the treatment group with kind of the same issues. And sometimes the therapist will back off and go, you know what? We've never named this group. We never kind of give us our unique symbol. Let's talk about who we are as a group, and let's give this group a name, or what it is that ties us all together. So sometimes stepping back and even doing things like, hey, let's draw a symbol of some type that represents us here in the group, and let's adopt it as a way of thinking about who we are and stuff like that. So success, cohesiveness increases with success. And this is, again, one of those facilitation skills where it gets tempting to dwell on negative things that group members are talking about and experiencing it. But one key aspect of being a successful facilitator is even when you maybe have a group member that just had a completely crap week, I mean, everything seemed to go wrong, finding a way to bring some positivity into what they're saying is important, such as, well, you're here. And it might be as simple as that. You're here, you're successful because you're here despite what's going on in your life. Or finding some way where you saw that in one of the crises, they managed it really well, and giving them that moment of positive success, even though they feel like their world's falling apart. Okay. And again, that's part of that listening and attending, because our instant reaction when people are starting to say how horrible of a time they had, maybe they had a lot of crises that week, is one, that empathy kicks in. And remember what I said about the dark side of empathy. Our first impulse when we're feeling the emotions of other people are not to help that person. It's about escaping our own emotional reaction. Okay. So that's part of it. We start to tune out on them, and we start to not attend and listen as well as we should. And then the second part is that when people tell problems, that's when we're most likely to think of a response before they've even told us what happened. So this is a good area to show why listening, completely listening, is important, is in order to find those little moments of success that you can reflect back to them and make sure that their story is completely heard. Okay. Oops. All right. So what are some factors that then also go beyond what we just talked about to influence cohesiveness? Okay. One is having common goals, of course. And this can be sometimes a challenge when you have individuals in a group that are there for different specific reasons. Like, for example, you know, if you're doing an addiction treatment, and part of your treat group is there who are voluntary, and are there because of they feel that there's something wrong with them, and they need to fix it. And then you might have another group who is there that are court ordered. And then you might have another group where the employer, in order for them to stay employed with them, is asking them to go through treatment. And it's really hard in some of those types of groups where you have multiple reasons people are there to find those common goals. Okay. And that again is one of the those are one of the things that are put kind of on the facilitator to kind of weed out those common threads, even though intentions of people being in a treatment group may differ from group member to group member. Okay. We just talked about success, but on this level, what we're talking about is not individual success. What we're talking about in this common factor is group success. Okay. So this is recognizing when all group members show up to group. All group members are on time. Those are simple examples, but also when you're in the treatment modality and everyone is providing good feedback and is engaged in working on a particular problem, and it's a complete group process, and recognizing the group, and as well as the individual contributions. Okay. Group size, we've kind of hammered on this enough on group size. And on, I think it was Tuesday, I did mention interpersonal attraction, which is something you should, again, as a facilitator, check in on, because we all have unconscious biases in that area. Okay. External threats. Okay. I found this, well, we can find it in most treatment modalities. When we look at addiction, we can see family members and friends who constantly are saying, oh, you don't need to be there. There's nothing wrong with you. You can have relationship issues. You can have unemployment issues. You can have all of the life things that can impact a person's group experience. Okay. And again, as a facilitator, it's important that you check in with each of your clients either before or during a break or after, especially when they've expressed, like maybe they broke up with they separated from their spouse this last week, or someone expresses, all my friends think it's ridiculous that I show up here. Taking that person on an individual level at a break or after group or just before, and just kind of checking in with them and saying how that makes them feel, processing it with them, and making sure that they're putting the coping skills that are being taught in the group to handle those situations. Okay. High status. This is again, I'm going to talk about this on the facilitator level and then on the group member level. Okay. Your group members are going to come in and they're going to put you at a high status because you're the facilitator, you're the expert, you're the person that should know what's going on. Okay. So when we're talking about high status, we can talk about the facilitator, but then we can also talk about group members themselves. So again, if you have a mixed group of people who have high status work versus low status type jobs, okay? Or we can talk about social economic status of group members. We could talk about all of those things that are within your culture, within your social community, puts people at different levels of status within that community. Okay. And probably my best example of this is one time I was doing a group. It was was it that PTSD group? Yeah. No. Yes. It was either a PTSD group or a father's group. I'm not remembering right now. Oh my gosh. Could have been a little bit of both. Yes. But anyways, there was a medical doctor in that group. Okay. And if you could imagine in that status dynamic, there were a lot of individuals who felt like when that person walked in the room, they would completely shut down because later on they told me they felt like they were going to say something stupid in front of the doctor. Okay. And so watch these status issues. And if you do have individuals that are very divergent in what they feel their social status is, making sure you make statements that we're all equals here, right? And that really should be one of your first rules, maybe, that you implement in your group, especially when you see a diverse status group, is making sure that everyone in the room knows that everyone is equal when we walk in this room, okay? And that includes you yourself, okay? You could say, yes, I'm here to facilitate the group, but this is your group. And I'm here to help guide the group, but I'm just as much here as you are, okay? And so taking care of that status stuff really can integrate, especially when you have, again, that more diverse status type group, okay? And then we have cooperation. Of course, as you can imagine, as cooperation increases, so does people's participation in the group, okay? The difficult part about cooperation, though, is you can start to develop something called groupthink, okay? Groupthink occurs when, and we'll talk about it here in just a minute, occurs when the group decides that a decision made by the group is something that we should all follow, even though on a personal level, we kind of feel like, no, I don't think this is the right direction to head, okay? I think it's up here soon. Okay, we went through this. You can go back to this slide. This is just basically everything we've been talking about in a visual form. Here's groupthink. So in explaining groupthink, just really quick, I can go back to a famous social psychology study called the Ash studies, okay? And if you take in Psych 101 or something like this may sound familiar, but what Solomon Ash did in this is he had two cards. So card A had one line and card B had 3 lines. I'm hoping I got this right. And maybe this one's and this one. So please forgive my crude drawing, but you'll notice that in the card B, roughly the second line is the one that equals A. Okay. And what he would do is he would have Confederates in the research room lined up on a table, much like this one. Confederates are individuals who work for the researcher. And then the person who comes in and sits at the end of the table is the participant. That's the one that we're really interested in what their response is. Okay. And what Ash simply did in this research is he would say, okay, which line in card B matches card A? And they would then go individually and go give their answers. Sometimes the Confederates would give the right answer. Sometimes they would give the wrong answer, like they would say it's the third line instead of the middle line, okay? And what Ash was interested in is how many people would conform to the wrong answer, okay? And he found that 75% of the time, participants would initially give the wrong answer that the group members gave, okay? Initially, okay? Now, this is where groupthink starts to take play, because after Ash said, "Are you guys idiots? It's line 2. Are you blind or something?" most individuals would go, oh, yeah, well, that's the answer I thought it was, and whatnot. But 1/3 of the individuals stuck with the group's perceptions or the group answer. They argued with Ash that because of this is what the group said, this should be the answer, not what the answer Ash gave, even though Ash clearly could line up the lines and show 1/3 of individuals would maintain the group's perception. Okay. In one, they said Ash is just giving us a visual illusion. It was kind of funny in the interview, but anyways, so group think initially when group members kind of give the wrong answer, 75% of the time, a lot of the other group members will give the wrong answer as well. Okay. Or misleading information or something like that. Okay. But then when you as a facilitator say, well, let's analyze it from this direction, and you kind of try to redirect them, if there is that too high level of cohesion within the group, if there is that loss of individual autonomy within the group, 1/3 of the time you'll get the group sticking to their initial analysis and even disagree with you. Okay, so here are some of the things that lead to this: too much cohesion, domination of group by a few leaders in the group. So like in the Ash studies, those few individuals in the first place kind of are the ones that led the participant at the end of the table to kind of give the wrong answer because they seemed that they were authoritative or something like that. Time pressure, need to perform, and crisis conditions all also lead to this similar groupthink pressure. And even in Ash studies, when you were time pressured, more individuals kept with what the group said instead of following what Ash said. Okay. So this is something to be aware of. And again, we're going to learn skills about creating group cohesion, but then we also need to make sure that individual participants feel like they have their own individual voice to kind of avoid this from happening. So. Oops. All right, and then there's controversy. Okay, so this is when there's infightings and group think going on. So you have but I want to put this in terms of what's called productive controversy, because this is one way that you can actually use conflict to break group think process. Okay. It's also known as creative aberration, valuing different points of view, facilitating and creating problem solving. And task-related conflict is good. Personal is not so good. Okay, so just to kind of bring these into light a little bit, these first ones right here are all ways that you can break group think processing by encouraging, as you would say, that devil's advocate in the room. Okay. And even in some groups, you will find that the facilitator will ask, if there's a lot of groupthink going on, will ask a group member, who is our devil's advocate for this group today? Who's going to give us that counterpoint of view? Okay. And really, this is what this is kind of about, is making it so when you do have a group that they all are agreeing with each other all of the time, and you notice that it's being slightly biased in probably a negative counter healing direction, these are all ways that you can create or eliminate that group think. Okay. Task-related conflict is good. Personal is not so good. Okay. And what this means is is that I don't know. I think of arguments on Facebook where in the beginning, if you read them, they say, oh well, here's my evidence for this. This is my evidence for that. This is your evidence for this. And then all of a sudden they start saying things like, well, you're just a freaking idiot, or oh, you must have been born backwards, or they start insulting each other instead of looking at the task or the problem. They start using personal attacks instead of sticking to what the actual task is. Okay. This one is what we could say is a red alarm if you have this starting in your groups. Okay. When group members start making personal remarks, derogatory remarks towards other group members, I'm putting this as a red flag, as it may be a time as for the facilitator to actually reorganize the group itself. Okay. Now, it's always in a high stress situation, people will make personal attacks. That's not uncommon. But when it becomes this back and forth, when there comes that person says, you know what, I didn't mean to say that about you today. I apologize. They don't make that um, resolution with them. They don't make that attempt to go, I was just stressed. I say stupid thing. Those kinds of things. When you stop seeing that, because you will see personal attacks once in a while, or personal conflict. But if it's a continuous thing, as a facilitator, that's probably about the time you want to reorganize the group. Okay. And maybe even rethink the way you're approaching the treatment process. All
right. Well, from what I've seen is that, like when you have a group like that, what happens is that some members of the group might, let's say you have a task or, some sort of exercise you're doing and going around the room and stuff, that individual or few individuals might feel attacked, like personally attacked, because they feel like it's about them, like you're addressing them, when in case you're not, and essentially you're not, it's just a an exercise, a random exercise that you're doing, just to cover certain points, or that you might have thought of, and then had nothing to do with the individual, but they might take it like that, and then they start lashing out, and that's what I've seen is with the conflict, that comes into play, and then other people will join in and be like, well, I feel that way too, I feel like that was directed toward me, what did I do, and I've seen that happen as well, just to just a little bit of reference, I guess.
No, I thank you for bringing up, because that's the other direction of it, right? When I was talking about the person making personal, but there are times, especially as stress increases, that comments of other individuals, they can take it personally, even though it was never meant that way. So thank you for bringing that up. That's another way personal attacks can start to develop in a group, even though the intention wasn't there. Okay. And again, as the facilitator, it's your job to kind of sit down and say, well, let's talk about what is it that we are actually talking about? What is it we're trying to express? So bringing the group back to the point that was trying to be made by the other group members, and then addressing, so what made you feel like you were being personally attacked in this context? Was it the way they approached you? Give some examples and really help them process, oh, well, it was just what they said. Or a lot of times I found it's group members, they came into group highly stressed already. And then they take all of those things personally in some way. But sometimes it's just because what they're hearing and what they're processing is a form of personal attack, because maybe they're talking about a situation that they were in that they didn't handle well, and they feel that the group's trying to point that out. It's that kind of motive thinking that we kind of go through, right? So excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. Great point. Okay. So this little U-shaped thing, again, it's about developing conformity and deviance within a group. Okay, we can see that when there is low conformity and high deviance, okay, that performance is low. However, on the other side, when we have high conformity and low deviance, performance suffers as well. Okay, our performance is best when the group is comfortable with each other. They feel we're here for a common reason, but they also have their own personal autonomy, and that they are still an individual with the ability to speak up when they feel something is being said right, or individually agree when something is an experience that they also experience. I know that deviance is seen as while you're going against the grain of the group or something like this, but the way I want you to think about it for groups is deviation can be simply saying, you know what, I don't agree with this. Okay, that's the normal type of deviation that we see. But the other type of deviation is I really get the point. I really understand what we're working on here, as an example, and I can see these parallels in my own life. Okay, why do you think that last one is a form of deviation as well? You guys have a guess?
Well, you, maybe possibly for, your high, are you talking about the high conformity?
So I'm talking about when a group member isn't going against the grain of the group, but they simply state something like that, something more positive, more like it looks like they're conforming to the group, but what they're doing is expressing their personal agreement, not group agreement. Does that make sense? So person saying, oh, I really understand what we're saying based on my personal experience. This is how I experience that. Why is that a form of deviation as well? And our Zoomers, you can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat. Why do you guys think that that second form of deviation isn't necessarily conformity, but it is actually deviating from the group perception, even though they're agreeing? Why is that still a form of deviation?
Because it's individualized, because it's not a part of the consensus.
Exactly. Okay, the person is individualizing their group experience. They're just not saying, yeah, this is what we experience as addicts. That's what it's like. They're not saying, yeah, this is because I have PTSD, this is what we're going to experience. They're saying, this is my experience with this thing that we're going through. They're providing their individual reality into the group process. And it is important. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for unmuting yourself and providing that, because that's exactly what that type of deviation is realizing your place, even though it's a group conversation. Okay. And it's important to look for both kinds of those deviations, because that really means that you're in this middle ground where you're getting groups to really talk about their problems, conformity, but then analyze it, deviation, on the individual level. Okay. And the individual expression. So that's what puts this in kind of that high performing zone versus the other two. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So this is getting into the performing aspect of the group. And there's just a few things to kind of look for when we're looking at performing. So this is when, for example, in a relapse prevention program, they're putting in coping skills to cope with triggers and pressure to drink, those types of things. This is where they're actually really putting in the work to overcome, I shouldn't say overcome, heal from what they've gone through. Okay. And this is where members have come to trust and accept each other. And they feel like they could go to each other for advice or for feedback on things that they're going through. Members comfortable presenting their own individual ideas, kind of like going back to that deviation component, and presenting their own views. But they also accept that other people, even though we have the same issues going on, someone else might have a different point of view, which can help me or help other group members kind of analyze their own situation. Okay. A team is focused on tasks, committed to the mission of the group at this point. So it's where, if you do group homework, all the group members do it and come back the next week and share their experience. And they all become committed towards whatever the mission of that group is. So, for example, in addiction, if it's sobriety, this is where they all are committed completely to the idea that as a group, we're going to practice sober living. Okay. In trauma groups, this is where we are all committed to heal from our past. And I realized, and that they realize that trauma is only part of them and part of their experience. It doesn't complete them as a total person, because well, with addiction too, one of the difficult parts about trauma is that it becomes all encompassing. It's the thing that is focused on the most. And it's easy to lose your individual when you've experienced lots of trauma. Okay. And so when we say committed to the mission of healing with trauma, it's about understanding that that trauma happened. It informed me about something about me. It will always be a memory that drives some of my behavior, but it doesn't own me. It doesn't control me. Okay. So focusing on those mission approaches, and when you start seeing group members do this, you're heading in the right direction. Okay.
Yeah. Funny how you said that, because the other day I talked to you about the PTSD group that I formed, or that I helped form within veterans, and that was a problem that some of them faced, was that we're unable to actually open up to when they see they come in, and then they won't say a whole lot. But then when you start talking about your experience, and it's there, it's a memory that we've all had, and we all share that commonality of the PTSD factor, and being in war zone. So being able to have that, they were able to kind of drop their guard down, and then when they started engaging, then you started seeing a little bit more that conformity, as you say, that they were able to accept themselves in that group, because of course we're not all perfect, but we were there for a purpose, and that purpose was to get through the PTSD, because there wasn't very much help out there for any of these veterans that were helping out or trying to look for the help that they desperately needed. And when I was able to provide that service to them, they started to open up after a while, and then that's when the healing started beginning, because they were able to get it out with people that dealt with similar situations. And I see that as a positive, because sometimes they walk around with all that trauma in their head all day, every day, and even at night, even when they go to bed, when they wake up, it's still there, it never goes away. They can't talk about it with anybody else, because anybody else doesn't understand it. So that's where in my experience, I've seen how you committed to that mission of talking about this stuff, because it does need to be talked about, so that you're able to kind of lay it to rest in some cases. So I really like that. Thank you.
No, that's an excellent example of getting to that mission focus and realizing, hey, yeah, I'm with people who are like me, right? And that's the important aspect of group treatment, is you don't feel alone. And then it allows you to, like you said, open up and really become committed to a healing process of some type, to overcoming, in a sense, that rush of this owns me. right? So good example. Great. All right. So let's talk about adjourning. Okay. Um, Now, adjourning can be in many forms. One, it can be because you're at the end of your process. So this is kind of that task force teams type of thing. So a good example of this is a lot of court order anger management. Okay, they order you to like 26 weeks or 26 sessions, and that's going to come to a solid end. Okay. Eventually, when you get through all the little lessons in it and stuff, not you go and get your certificate and it's taken care of that way. Okay. That's an example of a task force or a temporary type of group. Okay. So terminating task behaviors is when you start saying, okay, you no longer have to come to group or something like that. Disengaging in relationships. Now, this is when we now are starting to get into groups that maybe don't necessarily have an ending point, or it adjourning is um, ending early by the group's behaviors. Okay. And so, for example, disengaging from relationships, this is when group members just aren't really interested in talking about their issues. They kind of close up. This means that your group is coming to, and I'm going to use this term, kind of this natural adjourning phase. And if you're not ready for it as the therapist or the facilitator, that's where you really need to maybe rewind the clock in the group process and start over again with the storming and norming and all of those other phases. Okay. Because it isn't always planned, as the next bullet point puts. Recognize for performance and give closure. So this is when you, as the facilitator, is now integrating the adjourning phase. I brought up father groups, for example. When we did closure for that, we usually did a barbecue of some type and had them bring their kids, and sometimes they had to write a letter to their kids and read them during the adjourning phase. Those kinds of things. That is what we call a ceremonic ending, where you kind of have this ceremony or this rite of passage from being a group member to now hopefully in that case a healthier father or healthier parent of some type. Or it may just be, you simply provide certificates. That's not very ceremonial, but certificates are always a way for the person to carry that group with them. A lot of people I work with proudly display their certificates everywhere, and it's a way of recognizing the thing that the individual has gone through. Okay, so in the closing phase, it's always a good idea to have some type of a memento, like a certificate to take away, or some type of ceremony, like I said, like a barbecue that we did with fathers. Okay. And in some groups, in what we call open groups, adjourning may start to occur when there tends to be a lot of turnover in that group. So the example, again, if we go back to anger management, okay, in most anger management, a person can enter that group at any point of the topics that they're going to go through. Okay. And the difficult part is that if too many individuals enter a group at once, that can disengage the other group members who will start going through an adjourning phase because they don't recognize the group anymore. Okay. So when you have an open group, and especially when you have a task-oriented group, it's important to kind of regulate when individuals are leaving and entering the group, because you want to kind of keep core people in there for a length of time in order to recognize the new individuals and celebrate those who are leaving, and then transition those very carefully when you have open groups that you have control over. There's some groups there, I know, like AA, for example, you could have a whole new group every week, or the same people forever. So, but if you're a facilitator and you have the ability to schedule when people come in and out, make sure you don't bring in a lot at once, or you have a bunch leaving at once, because that's going to kind of just create chaos in your group. And those members that are there are going to go through the adjourning phase where they're just going to kind of end it for themselves. I've seen this when it hasn't been managed well, where maybe a person was on week 10 of an anger management of a 26-week session, and all of a sudden there's 10 new people and only one or two of the original people there, and those one or two individuals don't speak for the rest of the 16 sessions. They just show up and sit there, okay? Because why? They've checked out, they've adjourned, okay? So it's important to kind of keep that balance, especially if you have open groups, okay? All right. And then the last thing we'll talk about, we'll actually look at culture more specifically as we go through different treatment modalities and stuff. So this is probably more of a broader topic for right now in groups, but there are always cultural effects, and probably the most well-researched culture difference is something called collectivism versus individualism, okay? Collectivism, in its most basic terms, is my success and failures are the success and failures of my family and my community. The failures of my community and the successes of my community are my successes and failures, okay? So there's no separation between the individual and their community, okay? And in an individualistic culture, however, my successes are independent of your successes. My failures are independent of your failures, okay? It is me that is the cause of behavior, okay? And so if you can imagine in a group setting, you're going to be set up in two kind of different potential areas, okay? Now, I am going to say, yes, here in the United States, overall, we measure high in individualism, okay? In the broader culture of the United States, individualism is something that is prized, okay? Individual achievement is rewarded, okay? When we look at more Eastern cultures, such as Japan and even Latin America, we see more of this collective term. We see this collectivism. I always see it whenever a graduation season comes, and this is a big generalization. This isn't for everyone, right? But this is a big generalization where a majority of the non-Latin students, they may have their mom and dad there. They might get a flower and a hug, but when a Latin American individual, a Mexican American is there, the whole entire family shows up, and it's huge celebration. And this is kind of that similarity between individualism and collectivism. In that setting, it's that entire family unit that is going to celebrate that one achievement, okay? And so, and again, that's a broader example. But within pockets, and this is something to be aware of, within pockets of communities, we actually measure higher, and they can measure higher in collectivism, okay? And I will say that in a lot of Native American communities, collectivism rules, okay? And this is where you also have to play the role of culture, because a lot of individuals who come from Native American communities have a collectivist idea, but they also have the pressure of the broader culture for individualism, Okay. And so that's a topic for another day. We could almost have a full class on this issue. But what it is important to recognize that in working here in the United States, Great Britain, a lot of the European countries, there's going to be a pressure for individual performance. Okay. And one way to look at this is making sure that you create that culture that supports more of a collective idea. We're in this together, but also recognize there's this pressure for individual performance. Okay. And so balancing that can be very difficult within the group setting. Okay. So that's kind of on the that level. So I am going to stop sharing because that's the rest on the group component, and I'm going to stop recording.